We just had a wonderful conversation with a gentleman named Aidan Maguire. He is the business partnerships manager for a not-for-profit called Plastic Pollution Coalition.
PPC.
He is an absolute wealth of information, and he came prepared. So every question that we could think of, at least as much as can be contained within the kind of time limit we set ourselves.
We will do a second interview because there's so much to cover.
But he was ready. He had information. So every question that you might ask about plastic. So like, what are the harms on me? Like, what are microplastics? What are they going into? What are the chemical impacts of what is involved in that industry? Why does the industry exist in the first place? Why is it so big? Why is it so cheap? There are so many questions that we asked in this. And Aidan came with the facts. So if you have any questions at all about the plastics industry or care about doing things that will improve your health and your community's health, highly recommend this watch.
And please add any of your questions that aren't covered in the messages below, because such an incredible resource, and they've got partners that are scientists, researchers, all sorts through the Plastic Pollution Coalition, so we can get answers. Yeah.
Enjoy.
Welcome.
Hey, Aidan, how are you?
Hi, I'm good. Good to see you, Rachel and Jesse. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're
Such a
so
pleasure.
happy. So Aidan, would love to get you to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what the Plastic Pollution Coalition is.
Yeah, great to be here. My name's Aidan Maguire, Business Partnerships Manager for Plastic Pollution Coalition. We are an environmental NGO. We're a communications and advocacy organization. We have been around for about 15 years. We're pretty much remote, and we have sort of built a network of different groups over the last 15 years. So we have science advisors, business members, organizations, artists that sort of all work with us to share messaging around plastic pollution and also solutions to plastic pollution. And we have 3 different impact areas that we sort of operate in, which is business, culture change, and policy. So we sort of exist to connect with a global audience. We have a global following through socials and blogs. We do global webinar series. We do events, things like that, to really tell the truth about the issue and sort of the chemical pipeline, and then to galvanize support for what we believe are real solutions to the problem. And in my area of work, that involves better business practices, products, and materials.
Okay.
So cool. I'm so excited about this interview.
Yeah. So obviously, we spend our lives talking about plants over plastics and the benefits. So this is like a dream for us to be able to ask you all these questions. So for starters, plastic is everywhere, right? And I think that there's just such a normalization to it, right? Like we've all grown up with plastic being,
Not some of the older.
but then our great grandparents and those before had no plastics, right? So how have plastics ended up being so dominant in our lives today? Like what's
Just mainstream. Yeah.
How did they become so common?
Yeah, that's a good question. I actually like to bring this up all the time, that there was a world in which synthetics did not exist, right? And it
Amazing.
wasn't that long ago. My whole lifetime, synthetics have been everywhere in society, right? There are so many in my own house, and it's just sort of like inevitable. They're around us all. How did we get here? I mean, it was World War II, essentially, when plastics were being produced and made mainly for sort of a military purpose. Once conflict sort of subsided, they figured out that plastic could be used in a lot of different ways, but they also invented ways that they thought they could sell to the public. And so this was really a sort of illusion of convenience. They taught everyone that plastic meant a simpler life, because instead of, washing something or repairing it or, reusing it, you could just throw it away, and it made things, quicker and simpler. And so they really sold that. So, over the course of the last, over the course of the last 70 years, like that's the trajectory. And it's, it's exploded since then, used in a lot of different things. And, it really is a wonder material because it has so many different applications, but all of those applications, the sort of enormity of characteristics that plastics can exhibit and the chemicals in them, which I'm sure we'll talk about, are also the same things though that make it so persistent in the environment and
Uh-huh.
so destructive to the environment. So, it's just a really quick snapshot, but in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, that's when plastic really, really exploded into sort of every industry and every region on Earth.
Wow.
Can you just you mentioned they a few times in that story. Who is they in
Yeah, like
this
yeah,
case?
yeah. Which
Like
nation or like yeah, where did it
company? Like was it really like a close group of businesses that were doing this, or was it a policy and like was there a bigger vested interest? I'm just curious.
I know I never thought
Yeah.
about the plastic.
Well, when I say that, I mean, the United States was a major player in this for sure. Within the United States, though, it really is the oil and gas industry because 99% of plastic is made from oil and gas. So when I say they, I really mean petrochemical
Okay.
Okay.
companies that produce plastic from cracking ethane and then making it into those little plastic nurdles, the tiny little beads that can
Okay.
be made into many, many,
And
many. They're basically the building blocks of all different types of plastics. So maybe that's who I mean when I say they.
Yeah, no, that's
yeah, no,
that's
that's good to
helpful
know.
just to define it so simply. Like 99% comes from that. Like
I
that's
think yes, something
striking.
else I find interesting is like its greatest strength is its greatest weakness. So like the fact that it is so flexible and can be used for so many things, and it's the same reason why it's so hard to get rid of it because it's so it just keeps morphing into different and it's hard to get rid of it. So it's an
Yeah.
interesting it's like all those things you think it's like the master amazing thing, but then you just can't it's like weeds almost,
Yeah, it's like
this
an
amazing
invasive
plant
weed.
that will grow through any condition, and then all of a sudden nothing else can grow. And
Yeah,
you're like,
that's
yes.
a great point.
Yeah. It's a double edged sword, and that sort of, the, when it was originally created and sold to the public and people thought it's
Mhm.
this, miracle material, the double-edged sword is that it does a lot of incredible things. At the same time, our sort of our we didn't have the foresight to recognize how big of a problem this was going to cause every time we purchase something, every time we make a piece of plastic, because all synthetic plastic that has ever been made is still around today somehow. And I'm
Yeah.
happy to riff
Yeah.
on that one. And that is crazy to me, right?
It's
That like
so sad. Yeah. It's like,
it's just,
what a
and it
cool.
ends up somewhere, right? But, I think we turn a blind eye when we throw something away. It never really, there's no such thing as away. It ends up somewhere. Someone is paying the price for that.
Mhm. Another thing that I thought was interesting, saying that it came up during like through the war. It's interesting because we were in Japan because we manufacture there, and there is so much like double, triple wrapping of things like for sanitary reasons. And just can you explain how that came to be,
We
which was to do with the war as well? And we're like, but now it's part of their culture, so it's so interesting because we're having to it's been around for so long that it's become customary in some ways, the use of plastic.
in that culture, like we have a partner that is a zero waste store in Tokyo, and we went out for a meal with the founder, and she was saying that obviously, like back in the day, everything was zero waste before the war, but then with the war, hygiene became so important, and
Because there
because
was
the
major
the
infections and like
pillar of the culture is respect. Respect meant
for others.
wrapping it in plastic and then wrapping it again and wrapping it again. And
To
that's a
show, yeah,
show of respect because it's hygienic perceived. But she said it obviously it's gone to such an extreme. And so it's an interesting thing because
for her business,
culturally,
yeah.
you're trying to message in different cultures. And in Japan, it's a very different message because it's about respect and hygiene, or at least that's the perceived understanding of it. So
Mm.
I'd love to know, like, plastics, we all know generally that, like, probably not a good thing that we have more and more, but I'd love if you have any, like, really interesting facts about plastic that most of us wouldn't know.
Hmm.
Yeah. Well, I mentioned that 99% of them are made from fossil fuels. I work a lot with companies in the packaging space. When we think about plastic pollution, 40% of it out there in the world, in our oceans, is from single use plastic packaging used for
Once.
less than a minute and then discarded. So
40%.
yeah, 40%. And yeah. And so when that story that you just shared about culture, Japanese culture, that's really interesting because that's a medical use, you know, in a lot of different sort of fields. That's why plastic has become so
Hmm.
necessary. And even to
Uh-huh.
this day, you know, and don't quote me on that one. I think the point is that, you know, even today in our medical fields, that is still the number one material because it has really incredible properties when it comes to sanitization and things like that. It's really the unnecessary and single use problem, which has created such an environmental, catastrophe in terms of pollution, biodiversity loss, climate issues. So it's really the nuance there because we kind of hear that like medical argument all the time. And that's actually sort of a little bit of a distraction. So that's separate. But, some other quick stats that are just pretty alarming. So a documentary came out in April, I believe, called the Plastic
Okay.
Detox film. It's
Okay.
on Netflix now.
Great.
And, we've been sort of, as a communications organization, trying to share messaging about of course, the environmental impacts of plastic, but now the human health impacts. That is
Yeah,
really the driver for awareness right now. And that's what that
totally.
document is about. It's really about infertility. But when you say things like the human brain has an average of 7 grams worth of plastic particles, which is equivalent to a plastic spoon, that's scary.
What?
So,
That's
yes. And yeah, so when you hear, we have a plastic spoon in our brain, that's really what that means. It's on average, and that's actually true because it accumulates in parts of our bodies and our organs in really scary ways that we are just sort of starting to scratch the surface about. And so that's one. And then the other one I think is on the chemical front. There are 16,000 chemicals that have been found in plastic, and we know that 4,000 plus of them are really hazardous to human health. Many of those are underregulated. A lot of those 16,000 mix are still really understudied, and we don't even know the effects of persistence in the environment to species around the world, including humans. So the chemical component is really, I think, the scary part when you talk about human health.
And sorry, just being really like, why do they need so many chemicals in plastic? Does it just not hold its shape properly? Or like, are they just trying to fill it out? Or is it cheaper to put more? Like, why is there
Yeah.
6,000 chemicals found in plastic?
Yeah. I mean, plastic is a polymer. So you take, oil and gas, you crack it, you crack ethane at a really, really high temperature. You get
Okay.
this plastic nurdle, right? And you
Okay.
can thermoform that into, there's all these different ways that you can make all these different types of products from textiles to toys to everything. And so those building blocks are sort of the foundation, but in order to make them flexible or
Ah,
lightweight or
given it's
transparent
like,
or, add color to it or rigid or so basically the characteristics that you find in all these different synthetic products out in the world, that's because of those chemicals like plasticizers. So they add them to
that's,
that to give them the performance characteristics that they're trying to achieve for whatever, application it is in the
wow,
industry. That's why there's so many. Yeah.
That's
this
so,
is so like, I guess in a future, I'm trying to think like how, because I totally agree. Like plastics are perfect for certain things that are completely necessary. But if it's not necessary, it should be banned, like it shouldn't be allowed in certain industries. And I wonder, I hope like in future, those 16,000 extra,
mm,
if they were mapped out and said, these cannot be used in these industries, but these are allowed in essential services. It would be so nice if, eventually if that could all be mapped out and say, this is, this has to be stamped with a certain thing saying it's, but who
do-
would even, is that policy?
yeah.
Who does that?
Well, and it's region specific too, right? I mean, I'm in
Okay.
San Francisco. I'm speaking from a position of privilege. Like I could use different materials
Yes, of
for
course.
different things. I can choose the reuse thing or the bio-based thing or the stainless steel option, and bring but in a lot of places in the world, people just do not have that option.
Yeah.
And the
Yes.
way that the system has evolved is it has basically created, a sort of a necessity for people around the world to use single-use plastic because they have no other option. So,
Yeah.
when we talk about bans and things like that, we have to talk about regions, which ones are the most unnecessary, harmful, problematic. Are there direct replacements for that? Do people have access to those that isn't gonna, be 10 times the price so that they can
Yes.
still deliver, fulfill their
What they
basic
need.
needs, right? And so that's sort of what
Yeah.
the negotiators for the Global Plastics Treaty are trying to sort of work out. There are all these different factors when it comes to addressing plastic pollution from a policy or lens, but that's maybe a conversation for another day.
Wow. No,
Yeah.
that's great to understand how you guys are trying to tackle, yeah, even yeah, which angle you take because it's so complex.
You've said that, we have up to like a plastic teaspoon of plastic inside us that we're being bombarded by these chemicals. But to me, it almost feels like one of the advantages of the industry in terms of like their interest of expanding plastics as much as possible is that it just doesn't feel like there's like one piece that we can all latch on to say, oh, this is why it's better in our interest that we use less plastic. And I'm curious from your side, if you can shed more information on that and like what is it like what benefits us the most as individuals of living a life with less plastic exposure?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I will just caveat by saying I'm not a scientist, but what we do know is that microplastics and nanoplastics, they get absorbed by the human body in a lot of different ways. So we know that, right? We also know how many chemicals have been found in plastics. And we also know
Mhm.
how many of those chemicals so far cause many, many serious health problems from cancers to heart disease. So if microplastics are making it into the human body, we know that
Mhm.
there are many thousands of chemicals that are used in plastics. Those microfibers are a scary thing in our bodies. So the science that we have right now shows that there are many linkages to human health disease, to human health problems. So autoimmune disease,
Uh-huh.
cancers, infertility issues, dementia, other reproductive problems. In the United States alone, there was a study that showed that human health problems linked to plastic and petrochemicals is costing the United States healthcare system, taxpayers, $250 billion. These are all
What?
linkages that are being taken very seriously at the national, international stages. And so while maybe there is some skepticism amongst, that companies can sort of use to deflect attention, there's a growing body of evidence that shows that microfiber pollution that we ingest or we drink or we, heat up something in the
Breathe.
microwave, we breathe, yes, are causing problems in our bodies.
That is as solid an
Yeah.
answer as we could have asked for.
I'm curious. So if we know that, if we're like everyday a person going to the grocery store and shopping, I guess for whether it be clothing or food, do you have any advice you kind of practically give even to your friends and family of like, how do we lessen that plastic exposure through the choices we make?
Yeah, some simple
Yeah.
switches or tips or tricks or, little rules you go by.
Yeah, totally. I mean, again, I think it's a privilege issue based on where you live in the world. If you have the ability to find better materials that are non-synthetic, that's what I look for at the grocery store. So anything that you do not need to buy in single-use packaging, food packaging, I would always try to stay away from. Black
Mhm.
plastic is one of the worst forms of plastic. Anything that you heat up in the microwave, think of like frozen foods that you
Yeah.
plop into which I did for years and in college,
Yeah.
because I had no
Yeah,
idea, right? Like when you heat
convenience.
up that plastic, it can leach into your food. And that is a something that you can eliminate pretty easily,
Yeah.
right? So yeah. So you're looking for food that doesn't need to be heated up in plastic. You're looking for things at the grocery store that you can buy in and more durable packaging, in bio-based materials, in home compostable things. You're looking for things
Hmm.
that aren't ultra processed, or maybe things that aren't individually wrapped in single use
Yeah.
Yeah.
plastics, right? Because those like sachets, those things are really pervasive and they never get recycled, despite
Yeah. It's
what you
just
might
too.
hear about advanced recycling. And they just do not get recycled in our current system, because the plastic recycling system is broken. There are a certain amount of plastics that can be a very small amount, but over 90%
Not
of
that
them
cheap.
find their way into landfills, incinerators, the environment, and now our bodies. I mean, so look for
Can you
things
repeat
that
that?
you can.
What was
And
that
then
stat you said?
yeah, so
Like you
less than 9% of all, and that's a really generous figure. Other reports show that it's actually more around 5 to 6% of all plastic that's made is recycled. So over 90% of it is not. And that means that it goes somewhere. And even when it's recycled, plastic is you can't it's not a monomaterial like aluminum where it retains the same
Yes.
value. It's downcycled every time. And then eventually it's put in like things like decking and biocomposites for like and like roads, and it's just spread out all over the world.
Spreading it,
So,
trying to use
you
it,
know,
but it's
exactly. And so
really, we don't.
I would say
Yeah.
just to finish the like grocery store question, there are in certain product categories, it's a small behavioral change, but we work with
Hmm.
so many companies that are making different sorts of products. I mean, your company is making this is just one of millions, right?
Yes.
But hair ties that are plastic free, that's incredible. Like look for earplugs. There are a lot of them made of bio-based
Yes.
materials, home compostable now. For example, cleaning products. If you use powders, it doesn't need to be in a plastic bottle. So laundry soap,
Totally.
bar soap, anything that's like a solid bar or a powder that can be in a cardboard box. So the
Glass bottle.
liquid
Yeah.
yeah, waterless formulas, like when you're looking for cleaning products, those are huge and prevent the need for this giant jug of unnecessary
Right.
plastic that doesn't get recycled. So there's a lot of different ways you can go to the store and refill things, or farmers markets and take bags that you can
Yes.
put
Yes.
produce straight in. You don't need to go buy plastic bags at the grocery store, things wrapped in plastic shipped from, halfway around the world. So there's a lot of different like sort of like easy things that you can adjust in your life without spending 10 times the amount on the
Yeah.
thing. And a lot of those things I just mentioned are better for you or more durable. They last longer, for example, if you're not using the liquid thing. So there's a ton of examples that you can start sort of checking off that box.
That was fantastic. Yeah, and it's just like you just end up with less garbage, which is awesome.
Yeah.
No one likes to have a
Win-win.
household just filling up with garbage so much weekly. If you can just, yeah, paper bags, like so handy.
I'd love to ask. So, in our industry, we've always said that there is an artificial ceiling that has been set for how much people expect to pay for a hair tie. And we say it's artificial because, like, there's no accounting for ethics or for toxicity or for the planet in that process. But it still limits what we can do because, like, we know we have to tether ourselves to the at least the higher end of that industry to make our products affordable to everyone. Like, ultimately, that's the goal. But it just seems that plastic is so cheap. I'd love to know, is it really as cheap as
Yeah,
we
because it
feel
sounds
like it is?
complicated to make. You got to pull it out of the earth and then turn it into what you were saying, that little, and then like, it doesn't sound, you think growing a plant would be more affordable than all of that. Like, how does that work?
You'd think, right? And that's well, so we published a report in April. I know I've shared it with you both. For anyone that's listening, you're welcome to go check that out. It's called Material Shift. And in part 4, there's a section about this, which I love, because you're right that plastic is artificially cheap for a lot of different reasons, and
Hmm.
you can have conversations with large packaging companies and companies all over the world that are using whatever the application is, that they are choosing the synthetic thing. And they will say to you, it's because performance, it meets all of these things, which a lot of other materials can do. But at the end of the day, it's a cost decision. They choose that material, or they wrap it in plastic because it's cheaper. From the systems lens, plastic manufacturers, petrochemical companies that produce this stuff,
Yeah.
they externalize that cost on society into the environment. So we talked about this a little bit earlier, but it never
Yeah.
goes away and it doesn't break down. So it fragments, and some community, some ecosystem out there is bearing the cost of that. And you can assign dollar values to those ecosystems, to the loss of economic revenue in those communities. So there are dollar figures attached to the externalization of plastic. That's number one. The more direct answer to your question is because the building blocks of plastic, which are oil and gas, are heavily subsidized throughout the world. Direct subsidies, especially in the United States, but in major petrochemical producing companies, petrochemical facilities themselves receive billions of dollars of tax breaks every single. So
Wow.
there was a study a few years back that showed in the United States that the average new petrochemical facility was receiving over $100 million in tax breaks. And that just drives down the cost of plastic immediately. When you're trying to find a replacement, a bio-based, you're up against decades of built infrastructure, that's oil and gas, and you're up against taxpayer subsidization, because direct subsidies from taxpayers and indirect subsidies actually total, some estimates, in the trillions around the world for oil and gas production and petrochemical production, which drives down the cost of plastic, making it very hard for alternatives to compete. And so that is what
So they
you're up
fix it.
against.
And sorry, just to break
Yeah.
all this down in
Jeez.
layman's terms. So as a taxpayer, I'm actually giving some of the money I give to my government to pay oil and gas to keep making more plastic.
It makes no sense. We could be subsidizing incredible things in the world, and instead we subsidize oil and gas, like new explorations of oil wells and defending, oil and gas routes around the world. And those are more in the indirect category. And so it really makes no sense. They also get favorable import-export tariffs. So you're just looking at tariffs around the world. And this is from a United
My
Nations
gosh.
report. But if you look at all the other alternatives, bio-based alternatives, but also durables, so aluminum, stainless steel, and things like that, like
Yeah. Like good
synthetics,
recyclable.
yeah, synthetics are taxed at half the price of most of those. And
Wow.
so, from an end product standpoint, you're already at a systemic competitive disadvantage
Yeah.
there. But yeah.
So, quick question. How on earth did that setup happen? Was this because of like the military and it like at the very beginning that there was some tax stuff going on because it was for like defense? Like how on earth does a whole industry get all of these kickbacks that are
Yeah,
actually bad for our health?
I'm not a historian, but some of
It's just
these
the craziest thing to me.
Some of these subsidies have been around for over 100 years. And so, I think it's part of the conversation. Like, you have to talk about like energy independence and, what sort of the Industrial Revolution set in motion, which is this like, wow, it like unlocked this, this wild expansion of, into the West and around the world that was all powered by fossil fuels. And so they received, it was really, it's, the bedrock of the economy during the Industrial Revolution. And so a lot of these have been around for so long that they're almost like untouchable, at least in the United States. And, and that's just wrong. The last part I'll say is that it's a reinforcing system, because if we are subsidizing oil and gas, petrochemical companies that net billions in profit every year, they use that profit then to pour tons of money into, and this is all documented, political campaigns, especially in the United States. That's where I'm based, so I'm talking US a lot, but where Citizens United made it impossible for us to challenge this, because corporations are considered individuals. They can donate as much as they want to super PACs to elect whoever they want. And once those people are in power, they keep the subsidies are completely untouchable. They write favorable legislation to fossil fuel companies. They give these massive tax breaks to petrochemical facilities. The cycle just goes on. And those are the drivers that keep plastic cheap. And that's also why more and more is being produced every year, despite how big of a problem it is environmentally and the growing awareness of the human health impacts. by 2050, you hear stats like we're going to have more plastic in the ocean than fish, and that's just absurd. So
What do
we
you
need to we need to address like the reasons why plastic are so cheap. So I really appreciate that question. Sorry for riffing.
No.
No, this is what you need to for even me, I'm like, I don't understand all of the pieces as to why we're living like this, but thank you for taking the time to explain. It's been going on for a long time. And it's interesting because yeah, those breaks make a lot of sense when it's to do with energy, but if they're just trying to make up new ways to use plastic, which happens to be packaging now, it's like it's no longer benefiting, like, yeah, it's not keeping our houses warm. It's actually so it's
Yeah,
yeah.
curious on that. Like we've obviously got this awful, needless war in Iran right now and the Strait of Hormuz, and we're seeing this pinch point on oil and what it's doing. But there's been some interesting, like, positive news stories that I've been reading out of this, and like one of them I think is Pakistan and the amount of like solar electrification that people are bringing in just on an individual basis, not even relying on the government, but just trying to wean themselves off. And maybe it expedites that process of like the electrification of our transport and our grids. So what's the oil industry's plan if we do move fully to electric vehicles and electric, shipping and electric other things? Is that going to hopefully loosen their grip on how powerful this industry and the lobby is?
Hopefully,
That's a big
not
question.
not the stats that we're seeing. And look, what you will hear out there, and what we say a lot is that petrochemicals is really the plan B. And what that means is exactly to your point, is as the world's move towards renewables and electricity is produced in different ways other than burning oil and gas, right?
Mhm.
Yes, the fossil fuel industry will lose market share in those parts of the world. Especially in cars, we're seeing a major electrification, despite sort of hiccup in this country. The renewable revolution happening. It's happening in China. Some of the rhetoric might be that's just a reality. So they're placing their bets on petrochemical production, and that's why you see such heavy investment in them expanding petrochemical facilities, building new ones around the world, in especially regions like in the Gulf of Mexico. You see, a ton of new petrochemical
And
expansion
sorry, can you
because
define
Yeah.
petrochemical
I've
in
got it.
that
Yeah,
context?
exactly. For the layman's, what does a petrochemical
Plant.
product plant do?
Yeah.
And
yeah,
what would that look like to an everyday person?
petrochemicals is basically the middle between oil and gas extraction. You suck oil out of the
Mhm.
ground,
Yeah.
and
Liquid
then
oil.
And you have,
Yes.
liquefied natural gas. There's a lot of different sort of, buckets in
Yep.
that category. And then you have like your plastic products on the end. The
Mhm.
petrochemical industry are the ones that convert that. So
Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So to make those nurdles, like I was talking about ethane cracker plants, cracking it, and it
Okay.
is not easy. It is a very expensive, very complicated. They are long-term investments. They are billion-dollar facilities, and they're also conveniently located in places where in Black and brown communities around the world,
Right.
especially in the United States. And of course, the highest cancer rates in the United States are from the communities that live right outside of those facilities. And so that's a massive problem as well. So it's the whole pipeline of this plastic production. But petrochemicals can also mean like fertilizers, insecticides, basically byproducts of oil and gas that aren't for energy production specifically.
Right. So
Okay.
that's where the investment is going.
Exactly.
There's been some heavy pieces here, Aidan, but I
But
know you're
really,
celebrating your 4th anniversary with the Plastic
Thank you.
Coalition today. Clearly, you are sticking around because there's hopefully some good news out there. Can you share some reasons for hope and like what keeps you motivated and going?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that I think the renewables conversation that we were just having is a really good one. I think the awareness of the
yes.
problem is definitely expanding. This may be a hot take, but the human health impacts of plastic, I'm not glad that we are finding out that chemicals in plastics and microplastic pollution, microfibers are ending up in our bodies and causing all these and are linked to many, many human health problems. I'm not happy about that. What I'm saying is that now that we are starting to scratch that we are
Yes.
starting to find that information out, that is becoming the catalyst for unity and for action, because most people in the world care about their health. They care about their children's health. They care about their friends and family's health. And that is a unifying topic, and something that we should all agree on, right? So finding solutions to that, I think, can stretch across regions and across the political aisle. So that gives me hope.
Right.
And we've seen, a lot of a surge in awareness because of that, especially through amazing documentaries like the Plastic Detox film that just came out, and through just every, common people talking about it, learning about it, asking questions, being curious, and not sort of just turning a blind eye. I think it was easier to do that when it was an environmental issue where it's you throw it away and then maybe your garbage truck comes and then it
That's
just kind of disappears,
is
and
with
maybe it's shipped off to another part of the world where it becomes, you know,
Someone
becomes
else's.
pollution in the ocean, but you don't know that. So, there's that degree of separation. But, when you find out that, you have really, really high exposure to chemicals, in your body, and, you have a susceptibility to, you know, cancers. I think people are raising the alarm on that, and so that's what gives me a little bit of hope. It's kind of like morbid hope. I'll also say that the alternatives and sort of the solutions that are rooted in reuse are emerging. Like companies like yours are proving that it is possible to find bio-based solutions to make a product, to package it in plastic-free materials. And we have leaders around the world who are doing that in incredible spaces and proving
yeah.
that it's viable, not just,
Yeah.
an innovation that could do something in 10 years. They're showing that they can turn a profit with
Yes.
healthier materials. And so that gives me a lot of hope. We're starting to see bio-based markets really, and feedstock production really take off. We see a lot of different formats in terms of packaging, and we're starting to see big companies being forced to change their ways. And that's key, because they're not going to do it, you know,
Listen.
voluntarily. They're going to do it because there are market signals that sort of force them in that direction. And so, a lot of those things give me hope. And then from the policy, arena, Europe, is definitely a leader when it comes to
Yeah.
policy in,
Yes.
in this space. Yeah, there's a global plastic treaty being negotiated right
Right.
now, and so there are policy mechanisms that are popping up. There are sort of alternative materials that are becoming more viable and more cost competitive. Incredible innovations, by the way, like things that we
It's
could
very
have never
exciting.
imagined, like things that look and feel like plastic, that are plastic free, that are home compostable. They're not synthetic, produced from bacteria or by extracting seaweed,
So
and
exciting.
so a lot of those things they're not just fun lab experiments anymore. They are legitimate companies
Commercial.
that are mass producing these things in millions of units and competing against plastic packaging. So there's a lot of signs for hope, and yet you know I think we have a really long way to go.
Yeah.
Yes. Quick question, because
That's
you
great.
referred to bio-based when you were can you explain that to just the general person? Like what goes in that grouping when they're in the grocery store? Or because sometimes, something can say, oh, it's biodegradable or compostable or bio-based, and you're like, well,
Mm,
well, what is that? And is it
yes.
truly, or are they just greenwashing? Like,
Mhm.
what is bio-based?
I'm glad that you brought this up. I get this question weekly from friends, and it
Okay.
is, yeah, because it's confusing, because,
Yes.
labeling systems are confusing. Like when you look at the recycling, I know you're asking about bio-based, but that recycling, the chasing arrows symbol means nothing. It doesn't
Yep.
actually mean
Yeah.
recyclability, right?
Oh,
That is the most misleading symbol like I've ever seen. So the numbers are really what dictate whether or not it's recyclable, and that doesn't even mean widespread
yes.
recyclability. Compostability, there are third party organizations around the world that will certify a product. Whether it's industrially compostable, that's different than being home
Yes.
compostable. You need to meet certain more strict requirements to be home compostable. Industrially composted means that it's sent to an industrial composter who has a certain amount of heat and really ideal conditions for turning stuff back into soil.
Okay.
So there's nuance in all of that. But when I say bio-based, I mean something, when it's 100% bio-based, it means something that is it from a renewable source on the planet. So not fossil fuel extraction. So it's renewable. It grows in the ground. It's something
Yes.
that we
Okay.
can produce over and over again. So for example, hemp packaging, or you
Right.
can
Yeah.
make a lot of different materials out of so many agricultural waste streams. You can make materials out of essentially anything that grows. You can extract the cellulose from it. You can take seaweed and you can use those polymers. That's a biopolymer. So a polymer that exists it occurs in nature. So it's naturally occurring. You can use bacteria to synthesize, to basically eat sugars and convert them into something that and that is actually not chemical modification. So for us, the important distinction is if something has been chemically modified. So
Yes,
a
that makes sense.
bioplastic that you hear all the time, the most common one is PLA.
Yeah.
That one is actually it's mostly made from corn and sugarcane, so those are renewable. So that is bio-based. However,
Yeah.
PLA fragments into microplastics, so it
Yeah.
creates microplastic.
Sorry,
Yeah.
we were both.
We're waiting
Yes.
for
So we're looking at in our industry, cellulose acetate is really common use for clips and claws and combs. And there's a advancement where basically cellulose acetate, which is what like glasses frames are generally made of, historically is made 85% kind of wood,
cotton, like
cotton or
pulp,
wood pulp, and then
plastic.
15% plasticizer, which I now know more what that means. But there's been an advancement where there's been like a bio-based plastic. That's the replacement. So they call it bioacetate. But from our understanding, yes, 100% of the input is bio-based, but 100% of the output is plastic. And it creates this like, a very easy territory to, I would argue, greenwash, right? To say, hey, like,
Ultimately,
so it doesn't sound like there's a lot of regulation around putting bio in front of a word.
No, absolutely not.
can I add one more thing to that?
Please.
When I think about regenerative, when I think about
Yes.
this corn input, it's probably not organic corn, and it's probably a monocrop, and it's probably taking over a whole field. So is that regenerative?
Exactly.
Your
No, it's
soil
not.
is
It
going,
it
no, it's so,
it shouldn't compete for arable land. It shouldn't cause
okay,
deforestation. It should protect local communities and,
okay.
yeah, so there are a
That's
lot of
great to hear.
issues with industrial agriculture like corn, for example, which is why you have to talk about feedstock when you talk about bioplastics because you
Us-
look at so many alternatives. They use life cycle assessments and then they'll come out and say this product is incredible, and they leave out the two most important things, which are feedstock, the beginning, what was it grown, how is it
Cool.
grown, sort of all the
So that's
environmental and social impacts
okay.
of how that thing was
How it
grown.
was,
Also, what is it? Did you have to use fertilizers, insecticides? Did you create pollution with that? I mean, are you using regenerative farming practices, to make sure that you're sort of keeping microbes in the ground so it can sequester carbon? That's the regenerative farming piece.
okay.
Extremely important. Feedstock is left out so much. But then on the other side of that, it's what does the end material actually do? Is it home compostable? Does it have a bunch of
Yes.
additives in it? Does it have synthetics in it? Is it marine biodegradable in case it ends up in the ocean? Not saying
Uh,
that's the pathway we're supposed to have, but does it safely biodegrade completely into organic matter without creating microplastic pollution? So the persistence in the environment piece is left out of a lot of these LCAs, which is a mistake. And we call that out in our report because it allows companies to say, this is we're hit all we check all the sustainability boxes. Like, wait, but hold on. How is it made? And then how does it end up in the environment? Like, you're missing the two most important pieces. And of course, the life cycle like conversation is really important. You talk about production, transport, and all those things, but persistence in the environment, key, and how it was grown, key. So you have to look at those two things. And we talk,
Okay.
that's, a lot of our report has sort of material evaluation characteristics, that our, listeners are welcome to go check out.
That
Okay.
is great
We'll
to hear.
definitely link to that report. I honestly, Aidan, I think Rach and I could talk to you for hours and hours and still not be satiated. We have so many questions. You're such a wealth of knowledge. I'd love to just wrap on if there's one thing that people listening that you'd like for people listening to take away from this conversation.
Or an action. Or,
Yeah.
or a new behavior. I loved that
Yeah.
language. Yeah.
What would that
Anything.
be?
That's a good question. Can I give you like two?
Yes, please. Please.
There's
Okay.
unlimited.
Okay. My first sort of inspirational action, I guess, would be to just not accept waste as normal, because it's not normal. It's not normal, right? It is not normal that we throw something away that we use for a few seconds or a week or a month or even a year, and it doesn't even break down in 100, 300, 500 years, and it causes pollution somewhere, or it contributes to some animal dying, right? Like, we are causing the
Yes.
sixth largest biodiversity crisis this planet has ever seen. Pollution is climate and pollution are responsible for that. Our actions are responsible for that. So
Yes.
don't accept waste as normal. We've looked the other way for too long, and now it's accumulated throughout the world. So be curious, ask those questions, figure out how to make changes in your life, maybe which things you're exposed to that you didn't know you were exposed to before, and that's a great way to protect yourself and your family. So anyways, waste is
That's
not
a great
normal.
one.
And then the more just like quick, tangible, fun one, I would say, is, invite 20 people over to your house and get a few drinks and some food going, and watch the Plastic Detox film, because it really will open
Yes.
your eyes. Maybe invite over the skeptics, or the ones that always roll their eyes, or
No.
have that party each time, and then create like 500 solo cups and just throw them straight in the trash, like, and they were used for 2 seconds. Like, maybe
Yeah.
invite some of those folks over, and it's not like a "I told you so" type of thing. It's just a bonding moment for everyone, because once you break that sort of barrier, my family's always made, poke jabs at me and said I'm, sort of the plastic police, right? In every sort of scenario, they never want to tell me about their plastic usage. But now we've like come over the hump where they don't even tell me about all the reuse habits that they have and all the products they didn't buy, because they know they're dangerous to their health. Because I think once you kind of like, once you start to wake up to the issue a little bit, it spreads like wildfire in a good way. And so, there
Beautiful.
is a future where we use different materials and we're not using plastic anymore. And maybe it's in certain industries, and that's fine. But I think that's a tangible and kind of fun one.
I
Awesome.
love those two.
Yeah.
We've got a party to plan. Hey, we could call it your birthday party.
All right.
Perfect.
Aidan, it's been an absolute pleasure, and we definitely want to stay in touch and hopefully do something like this again. You're a wealth of information. We love the work that Plastic Pollution Coalition is doing in this world. Need more people like yourself and organizations like PPC. Really grateful for your time, and we will definitely link and shout out assets that PPC has, and also the Plastic Detox. We'll cite that
Movie.
again.
Yes,
But
that'll be
thank you
great.
so much for your time today, Aidan.
Yeah.
Absolutely,
such
guys.
a
Thank you
pleasure.
so much. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And, companies like yours, we need more of them. So, keep up the good work, and, hopefully chat soon.
Yeah. Pumped to meet all the other cool companies you're working with as well. That'll be
Yes,
great.
we'll make that happen.
Yay.
Bye.
See ya.
Bye.